Hey kids, CJ Ramone, world famous Ramones, right here. You're watching CJ Says, a Ramones podcast. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey kids, CJ Ramone, the world famous Ramones here. Welcome to CJ Says. We are starting off with our deep dive series. Where we will be covering the entire Ramones catalog, side for side, picking famous songs, talking about lyrics, memories that the albums have been a part of in my life, and generally telling some good stories. But I want to welcome on board here my producer and co-host, Mr. Matt Stocks. Matt, how you doing?
Top of the morning or evening or both, my friend. We got the transatlantic time difference going, always in our favor. So it's always morning for you, evening for me, but a pleasure as always to see you. I like that you have paid attention to the record we'll be talking about in this week's episode with your mise en scène back there. We're going to begin, as all good stories should, at the start. Album number 1 by the Ramones. I've got a few stats and facts here, which I'll reel off. And then what I'd love to know, I think, to begin is your memories of first hearing the album, where you were, who you were with, what your initial impressions were. But first up, here we go. For the uninitiated, Ramones was released in 1976, April 23rd specifically, which was the day we launched this podcast 50 years later. So it's all tied in wonderfully well with the 50th anniversary of Ramones. It came out on Sire Records. It was recorded at the Plaza Sound Studios in New York, produced by Craig Leon. There was 2 singles on the album, Blitzkrieg Bop and I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. 14 songs in total on the record, 7 on each side. A running time of 29 minutes, which means that these songs average about 2 minutes per song. The album was recorded in 7 days for $6,400. And wildly, only 6,000 copies were sold in the first year of its release. It wasn't until 2014, which was 38 years later, that the record finally got that gold status, which means 500,000 units sold. So, you know, not what you'd call a commercially successful record at the time of its release, but obviously widely considered one of the most influential and important punk albums ever made. Obviously always on all of those best albums ever lists, you'll find this one. And, you know, it's about as good a place as any for a hardcore longtime fan or somebody who's never heard the band to start. So let's dive in, dude. Ramones, 1976. What's going on in your life at that time? And set us in the scene of when you first dropped the needle on side A and the record took you on the journey. What was the initial thoughts and impressions that this album made on a young CJ Ramone?
So April of 76, I would have been 10 years old. 10 years old. I think I was 10 years old.
Well, what year were you born?
So I'm born 65.
Right. So yeah, you'd have been between 10 and 11 in that interzone.
Yeah.
Nearly
Right.
a teenager, but not quite.
Right. October 8th, 1965. Funny enough, me and Johnny share that birthday.
Oh, wow.
October
Okay.
8th. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to circle back to that. We'll do a separate Patreon episode on birthdays shared over the years. So you're 10, 11. And what sort of music are you listening to at that point?
At 10, 11 years old, I was still listening to a lot of what, a lot of what I heard my mom and dad listening to. So I was really listening to a lot of country music. All the rock and roll and stuff that I listened to was 50s and 60s and of course 70s, right? It's the 70s. In my dad's Volkswagen bus, he had a AM FM radio with an 8-track player. So I was hearing all the greatest stuff from the 50s and 60s and all this great country music. And that's pretty much what I grew up with. But right around that time period is when my older cousins who at this point are in their mid to late teens are listening to some really cool stuff. And I start getting turned on to a lot of it, my uh David Bowie and Black Sabbath and T-Rex and like all of this kind of my I had one cousin, my one cousin Raven was really into glam and stuff. So like
Raven as
I
well.
yeah,
What a great
yeah,
70s
yeah,
rock and roll name.
yeah. But she was into like a lot of the glammy stuff and even though at first I was like, "Oh my God," like looking at a picture of David Bowie, basically in drag for the moment, or very androgynous anyway, or T-Rex, Mark Bolan, like, with a boa, and it was it challenged everything that I had grown up with at that point. But that's right in the time period when I started listening to some things, influences that did not come from my mom and dad. Right, in 1976 is like kind of like ground zero for all of that. Um, but you have to keep in mind, I grew up on Long Island, right? I grew up born in Queens, lived up in Massachusetts for a while, but I did most of my growing up in a small town in Long Island called Deer Park, right? And where I lived in particular, there was this large wooded area, several acres of just trees, like a forest. That was big. And from when we first moved there, I used to spend all my days back there by myself, just exploring the woods. Right? I, you know, I, I was a typical kid. I just loved like imagining all these different things about this area and stuff. But back in this woods was this old Victorian mansion that had burnt down and collapsed. So I used to work my way around the ruins looking for anything that was really old. So I found like coins from the 1800s. I found like this old piece of china that was like a vase, like beautiful and intricate. And I found some stuff back there that was like really cool. So like this place, I was kind of like Christopher Robin, you know what I mean? Like my imagination and just exploring back there. And but it was by myself a lot. Like I was by myself a lot. Um so one day I'm back there in exploring this the old burnt down mansion, and I smell cigarette smoke. Now I had already started smoking at like 9 years old. That was one of the things I used to do in the woods. I would steal Salem cigarettes from my parents and go back there and smoke. That was 9 years old. But so I'm hanging out back there and I smell smoke, and all of a sudden I hear girls talking, and so I peek out from behind a tree and I see these two good-looking blonde girls that just like walking through the woods. And of all the years of hanging out back there, I had never ever ran into another person. So I'm like, oh, and like it's like the '70s outfit, the tube top with the bell bottoms, and like the
Just
this.
still so gorgeous, that
Oh
look.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yeah. I and for a kid growing up in the '70s, that was like the height of female fashion to me. Um, so they come over and they start talking to me, and we're going back and forth, and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I was like, "Yeah, hang out back here, blah blah." And so as we're talking, the one girl says to me, "Hey, you want to come over my house?" Right?
Dude,
So
this
now,
is like the best day of your life.
oh brother, I can't.
And you haven't even heard the Ramones yet.
Yeah. Now this isn't '76. This is more. I want to say it's more like '77, probably '77, maybe even '78. But I'm pretty sure it was around '77, because I don't think. Let me think of what school I was in. So I was still in Catholic school. So yeah, so this has got to be 77. It's got to be 77, 78 anyway. So yeah, she's like, "Yeah, come over my house." Now, first off, I was like, I didn't want to say I got to go home and ask my parents. So I was like, "Yeah, sure, come on, let's go." So we walked to this girl's house. Now we're walking for a while. Like I guess, it was probably like a 40-minute walk to her house, right?
And now, is this you and the two girls, or has one of them gone off and it's just you and one?
No, it's the two of us. And so um I could tell they're like, they're feeling me out, asking me what bands I listen to and stuff. And like I said, by 76, 77, I started branching out and listening to some cooler stuff, and at that point, I was probably like, I was really into Black Sabbath by that time. By 77, I'm already fully into Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, all of that type of stuff. So we walk like 40 minutes. Now we're on the other side of town, so I'm kind of a ways from my house. But not that I don't know where I am or I'm going, but I realize like I'm not gonna make it home for dinner. So we get over to the one girl's house. Her name is Christine Block. She lived on the west side of Deer Park. Um, and so we get over by her house, and then her friend peels off. She's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go home." So me and Christine go to her house. So we get to her house, and nobody's there. So we go we go down to her room, and we're hanging out in her room, and she goes over and she picks up a record and puts it on, and she drops a needle, and she turns around and she goes, "Have you ever heard the Ramones before?" And she holds up the Ramones' first album cover. And I was like, and I had heard of the Ramones because my cousin Dominic, who lived in Queens, had mentioned, I don't know, I can't remember if he knew somebody. I think Dominic worked for the Plasmatics for a little while, and I think I think he had mentioned them to me first. I think Dominic was the first one who ever asked me about the Ramones. And but she turns around with the album cover and holds it up, and just as Blitzkrieg Bob comes on, and I was like, it was like this crazy moment. I was like, boom. And you can ask anybody, uh, uh, where they were when they heard the first Ramones record or what the first song was. Everybody remembers it. Everybody remembers it. It was, and at least from that time period, because they were so different from everything else. They were so completely different. So she comes over and sits down on the bed next to me and breaks out a bag of weed, dumps it out on the album cover and starts taking the seeds out of it, She rolls up a joint. I think it was like strawberry flavored papers back in the day, like Easy Whitey used to make strawberry flavored rolling papers. She rolls up a joint. And so I never smoked pot before. You know what I mean? I was like, I had never, I had been around it, I had smelled it before, but it was the first time I ever smoked it. So I'm sitting on this girl's bed in her bedroom. Parents aren't home, listening to the Ramones, smoking weed. And smoking weed really enhances the way you listen and hear things, or just the way you experience things in general. And I sat there like my jaw hanging open, listening to the first Ramones record. I was so high. And uh I was there for a while, and then at one point she just like grabbed me around my neck and jammed her tongue down my throat.
I was going to say, did this story have a happy ending? And
Oh my
yes,
God.
yes,
It was
ladies and
like,
gentlemen, it did.
so the first day I heard the Ramones, the first day I kissed a girl, the first day I smoked weed, all at the same time, all in one day.
That
And
is such a of that era story, and
yeah,
so perfect for that period, and
yeah,
so genuinely heartwarming,
yeah,
and life changing. Like all the
yeah,
elements at play that just would shape and change the course of your entire life in an
yeah,
afternoon. It was like I use this analogy a lot with moments when people's whole worldview is transported. And it's like The Wizard of Oz, when the world goes from black and white to Technicolor, and you land in this magic universe where possibilities are endless and everything you thought you knew is thrown into question in a good way. Incredible. What a first time story.
And fast forward 15 years or whatever it was, 16 years. I was on, I think it was my first tour with the Ramones, first US tour with the Ramones. So I was always wanting to tell Johnny that story,
Of course.
but I learned really early on that Johnny's not like like he's not a real sentimental kind of person,
Yeah.
So I always wanted to tell him that story. So one day we would hang. It was just the two of us hanging out, and I said to him, "John, I got to tell you this story," and he was like, "Okay, go ahead." So
If you must.
yeah, he had to consider first off whether he wanted to actually hear it, But I told him the story, and I relayed the whole story to him, and he was like, yeah, that's good story. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Like he was, and believe me, Johnny was tough to like. He really was very judgmental about the importance of things, and and like, why would you say that? You know what I mean? Like, he was that kind of guy, very analytical about everything. But he was like, yeah, okay, that's a good story. That's good. Because to me, it really was, like you said, it was like, that day is one of the days I'll take to my grave. Like, literally, that's one of my most enduring memories of my entire childhood.
A rites of passage moment.
Yeah.
And those days are so few and far between. And everybody has their own version of them. And not everybody winds up playing in the band that soundtrack the moment, though. So that's a pretty I gather then that that was what you'd call a positive response from Johnny Ramone, for him to say, yeah, that's a good story. That's about as much praise and kind of a reception you're gonna get.
Yeah, and
Well,
I don't mean to make him sound like he didn't have a sense of humor or anything like that, but like, I think Johnny looked at it like, if you were telling him something that you thought was important, that's when he would put on the analytical cap and go, okay, tell me, and I'll let you know if I agree.
Well, listen, I'm looking at some of the other albums that came out that year, right? And the big ones is Songs in the Key of Life, Stevie Wonder, Eagles, Hotel California, Peter Frampton, Frampton Comes Alive. So when you say the Ramones were different, you ain't lying.
Yeah.
And there's obviously, there's some great stuff coming out that year as well. AC/DC put out Dirty Deeds that year. Thin Lizzy put out Jailbreak. So there's definitely some real cool hard rock albums being made. But again, nothing that sounds quite like this. So maybe some kind of historical context for the band and their journey to recording. CBGB's obviously had been this kind of fairly vibrant hub for a lot of these bands for a couple of years in the lead up. And Patti Smith was the first of that scene to put out an album in 75. She put out Horses. Maybe you could shed some light on this. I've been reading this book recently called From the Velvets to the Voidoids. Really interesting book on the whole New York scene. And the writer in that, he talks about how it was kind of split into two camps. And there was like the art rock contingent, which was Television and Patti Smith. And then you had the, for lack of a better phrase, the fuck art, let's rock contingent, which was the Blondies, Talking Heads, Ramones. All of these bands kind of inspired by Velvet Underground and the Dolls and the Stooges and MC5. So all taking similar influences, but interpreting them in slightly different ways. And Ramones and Blondie and Talking Heads definitely leaning more into that pop sensibility and fun. How do they get signed? How do they get the deal, and what's their journey from the CBGB stage to the studio. Did you talk much with the guys about, how that offer was presented?
So a lot of the stuff that I learned about that particular part of the story came from Tommy, and not just from my conversations with Tommy, but interviews that Tommy has done over the years. Um, in the beginning, and that is because Tommy never really wanted to be the drummer. Tommy wanted to be the manager of the band. But because he couldn't find a drummer to play the style that he heard in his head, he said, I'm going to take over drums until we can find a drummer. But as things got rolling, he kind of got like stuck in that position and not wanting to break the momentum that they were developing at that point by playing at CBGB's regularly, starting to develop a following. He didn't want to break that momentum, and that's why the first record, Tommy's there. Tommy's the drummer on the first record, um, and subsequent records. But the way that Tommy tells the story, Craig Leon, who recorded the band, I think Tommy said he was working for Sire Records at the time and talked Seymour Stein into coming down to CBGB's to see the Ramones. Seymour Stein, of course, signed the Ramones and the Talking Heads and Blondie and a
And a
whole
woman
bunch
called
of
Madonna, right?
yeah, yeah, and a whole bunch of other bands after them from very different scenes. Um, and of course, Linda Stein, his wife, who eventually managed the Ramones. Um, I think that's what Tommy said. It was either Craig Leon or maybe Danny Fields that had gotten Seymour to come down. It may have been Danny Fields. Danny Fields, of course, worked with the Stooges, Iggy and the Stooges, early on. Danny was a really well-known guy. He was out in L.A. When the Doors were breaking and stuff like that. Danny, he's a very well-known member of that community back then. But it was either Danny or Craig Leon who actually got Seymour to come down, and the Ramones uh, played for him at CBGB's. But the interesting thing about CBGB's back then was it was just a little dive bar. And it wasn't like all these kids from the burbs were coming out to see the Ramones and see all these other bands. It was mostly all the artists and fashion designers and musicians and stuff that came to CBGB's. Most of the times they were playing in front of each other
Mm.
rather than to, fans.
They'd finish their set, walk to the back, sit at the bar, and watch the next band, kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what it was like. But of course the scene there did pick up. It did, Ramones first played CBGB's in 74. I think it's September of 74. They played their first show at CBGB's.
That's what I found really interesting about reading this book is, 72 was obviously when the Dolls put out their album. And you can trace, the roots of the scene back to then. And 73, 74 was when they were all forming and first performing. But they just couldn't get arrested, could they? Nobody, not even the industry, nobody really in New York for a while cared. And they had nowhere to go, nowhere to play. And that's obviously why CBGB's became so important, is because it offered a place for bands who didn't have record contracts to perform, which at that
Right.
point was fairly unusual, right?
Max's Kansas City was the place everybody wanted to play. That's where all the big acts played, the national acts when they came through. They all played at Max's Kansas City, and that was always the goal, was to play there. But for the startup bands, getting a gig at Max's Kansas City wasn't always possible. So CBGB's benefited from that in a great way because all those bands played at CBGB's, and now CBGB's develops the reputation because of those bands. Max's Kansas City made a lot of the bands that played there. The bands that played CBGB's made CBGB's what it became, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Without those bands, that vital scene that developed down there, CBGB's would have just, it would have been any other dive bar. But Hilly was a visionary. He kind of knew, like, I got to get these kids from around here to come in and play, and he would just give them a stage and tell them, yeah, sure, sell a couple tickets, put a couple people in there. But yeah, so that's as I understand it. I want to say it was Craig Leon, but I think it may have been Danny Fields though that got Seymour to come down. And of course, from there out, it's pretty much, everyone knows the history. The Ramones get signed to Sire Records. Um, the first record comes out. Um, One thing I gotta mention here. So when Ramones comes out, Johnny told me this story. He looks at the back cover, and there was a misspelling on one of the song titles on the initial printing of the record, and he said he was so disgusted by it that he was just like, "I'll forget it. This isn't going to do anything." He was like, "That's to Johnny. That was so unbelievably unprofessional that there would be a misspelling on it." But if you own one of those initial prints with I think it's on Blitzkrieg Bop. It was misspelled. I think it was Blitzkrieg Bop. That was misspelled. But if you own one of those, it's worth a couple of dollars. So hold on to it.
Well, let's jump in, dude. Side A, track 1, the aforementioned anthem to end all anthems. What a way to kick off your first ever record, right? And for you, obviously, the first song that you hear as well. Originally, I'm led to believe, called Animal Hop, not Blitzkrieg Bop. Is that right?
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
Doesn't have the same mystique, does it, Animal Hop? I'm sure the tune would have still been good, but there's something about that ambiguous title that, from the very start sets the Ramones apart. Because you're like, what is this about? Like, on the surface, it's obviously seemingly a song about the excitement of attending a gig. And it's just, about the live environment and that energy between the crowd and the performer and, the chants, hey ho, let's go. But then there's this kind of Nazi German imagery in there as well, which would obviously resurface throughout their career, which I'm sure we'll talk about in subsequent records as well. But yeah, this is a Dee Dee and Tommy co-write, right? This one?
Correct.
And so assumedly Dee Dee is the one who comes up with the title, I'm guessing.
Yes. Well, Dee Dee grew up. I mean, didn't grow. Well, Dee Dee lived in Germany as a kid. You know what I mean? Which he revisits later on in his rap career. But
well, he was the child of an American soldier and a German woman, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So he was well steeped in German culture.
That's really got to shape your worldview as well. Coming from that marriage and union of cultures and people at the time, it's definitely going to leave a lasting impact, isn't it? And create a unique perspective on the world.
Absolutely. And a unique vernacular. That was one thing that Dee Dee was really gifted at, was being able to take the everyday and turn it into like street poetry. Like literally that, like trying to describe, Dee Dee's lyrics, because, it's really easy, to just dismiss, the Ramones lyrically, because it seems like, oh, it's lowbrow humor, and, it's just stuff to get people's fists pumping. But you really have to ignore a lot of stuff to get to that point. And I think in general, Ramones music kind of gets that label of, oh, it's just simple, it's simple rock and roll. But I gotta tell you, it's not as simple as people think, and there's a lot more. I mean, to me, Dee Dee really was a poet, and so is Joey. Yeah, absolutely, so is Joey. But yeah, Blitzkrieg Bop is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because to to describe it in the way that he does, um, uh, you know, eh, you can't you 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 can't say things in a way that in the way that Dee Dee does unless you visualize them in a certain way. So, um the
This is when we need all the lyrics for all the songs just there on
yeah,
a prompt, isn't it?
yeah,
I hear what you're
um
saying though, because there's an abstract quality to his imagery, and it does conjure up visual
yeah,
metaphors,
yep,
and
yeah,
he truly is. I've been a long time fan of the Ramones, but starting out on this podcast journey with you and beginning to do these deep dives on my own and really listen and read up about them and think about these songs in different ways. We're only track one of side one, episode one, and I'll already share with you, dude, my appreciation for and my understanding of this band has deepened so much already. And that's one of the main things I'm super excited about this show, and going on that journey with you and taking all the listeners with us, because you nailed it. Like, they're a minimalist band, but that minimalism is steeped in layers and nuance and deconstructive pop art, referential, self-referential lyrics. And they are just, I think, so overlooked and underrated as songwriters, as lyricists, as storytellers, and as you say, as poets.
yep, yeah. They're riding in the back seat, they're generating steam heat, pulsating to the backbeat. That's not to me. That's not that's not like a common way of expressing what the scene is like in the car going to a show. You know what I mean? That's real poetry to me. And I'm not um I'm not unschooled in poetry and literature and stuff like that. I know I sound like a goon. When you're from New York, you can recite poetry, you can recite Shakespeare, and you still sound like a goon. But I'm a pretty good judge of the written word, and and I really love the way that Dee Dee and Joey expressed simple things from everyday life that I could relate to. That I could really relate to. I love the way that they expressed it. I felt like they were singing about my experiences in the world.
I have to say as well, right, as a rock and roll DJ, who's someone who's spent thousands of hours in rock bars and clubs playing all the familiar, tried and tested rock classics over and over and over again. Although the likes of Smells Like Teen Spirit, Ace of Spades, and Killing in the Name by Rage Against the Machine, those three songs are all obviously all-time epic, just iconic classic songs. But I could probably live without ever hearing any of them again, because I've just played them and overheard them so many times. Blitzkrieg Pop, I could listen to on loop forever and never tire of it. It's
Yep.
one of those really unique classics that everybody knows, but you still just can't help but tap your feet and smile when it comes on.
Yep.
Even the millionth time you're hearing it.
I got to correct myself. It's the piling in the back seat. Okay, that's right. But the that is, to me, that is exactly why the Ramones are so loved, is almost because they where a lot of other bands, their influences are more contemporary, right? Nirvana obviously listed the Ramones as an influence. Motorhead, um, very much from the same age group as Johnny and Joey, but his music was their Lemmy's songs were more contemporary in that they were influenced, or they sounded more like contemporary music. But the Ramones took what made the original rock and roll, the the all the Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and all the original rockabilly guys. They took all of that and they just played it really fast and distorted. They captured the essence of what made all contemporary music and made it their own. And that's why it Ramones to me is so timeless, because it embodies everything that the original rock and roll scene wanted to embody. The only update they gave it besides playing fast was the lyrics. But even with that, they still took I got the girl, I lost the girl. I got the girl, I lost the girl. They took that and just added their humor to those situations, you know. But at its core, it was still the traditional rock and roll thing, but all the best aspects of it. And they got rid of all the frivolousness of the other music going on in that time period, guitar solos and 4.5 minute songs and orchestration until they worked with Phil Spector. Or they got rid of all the unnecessary aspects, and they were like rock and roll chemists, like they
Yeah.
just took the best of it and put it all together and added their humor, and their version of what the original rock and roll was like, and they made timeless music that, to me anyway, so few bands have or will be able to capture that again.
Well, you mentioned humor there, which takes us very nicely onto track 2 of side A of the Ramones, which is just about one of the funniest songs in their whole catalogue. It's a firm favourite of mine as well. I might, depending on which song you pick as your favourite from side A, I might lean towards this, but we'll get to those at the end of side A. Beat on the Brat, a song that doesn't necessarily condone or encourage child abuse, but it doesn't discourage it either. And it's just so funny. And I just love it. I just can't get enough of this tune. Every time I hear it, it puts a real, genuine smile on my face, knowing that they were getting away with those lyrics, and just having fun with this concept of a spoilt kid just doing your head in. And so you just take to him with the bat. Just
Yeah, this album could never be released today.
no,
If you
no,
if you wrote this album today, you wouldn't be able to get a gig.
no.
It kicks off with a song, with Nazi terminology, right?
Yeah.
And the next song is about beating children with baseball bats. You couldn't get this record out. But the
But it's made with love, and that's what's important.
but the you have to understand, like, there was so much humor in everything they did, right? First off, Joey's Jewish. Joey's Jewish, and he's singing Blitzkrieg Bop. Not because he believes in Nazism or he's trying to glorify the Third Reich or anything like that. It's They're completely poking fun. It's to make people laugh. Johnny told me that when I got into the band, I tried hard not to be like, asking Johnny a million questions about the past and blah blah blah. I tried to like be patient, and I figured that over time he'll tell me some stuff, and he did. And one of the stories that he related to me was that when they first got together, they thought that they were going to be to the Bay City Rollers what the Rolling Stones were to the Beatles.
Makes perfect sense, because Blitzkrieg Pop is pretty much the Bay City Rollers on speed,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, right. Exactly. But but they thought they would be, instead of being like the cute boys and singing nice songs, that they would be the goons singing about goonish stuff, So he was like, we thought it was funny to sound like goons. Like, we thought like that was like comical, you know what I mean? Like like I don't know, back then, like a lot of cartoon humor contained a lot of that stuff. Bugs Bunny, there was always like a goon character in there. Yeah, like it was part of American culture. This
Mad Magazine is like a big one that comes to mind, right? That
right,
satirical, poking fun.
but that was there. They did that intentionally, and he told me even like in interviews and on stage, that's how they wanted to come across. But Beat on the Brat, yeah. And a repeating verse and repeating chorus, you know what I mean? Like it's it, it, it's simplicity and realistically that's what it is. It's just super simple and catchy and just funny. It's you can't read those lyrics or sing along with that without having a smile on your face. And that's really what they were doing. They were just poking fun.
You're not going to sit there as well and pontificate like, oh, I wonder what this song might be about.
Yeah. But the other thing you have to consider too, right, is um I know me growing up back then, if you grew up in a blue collar household, you would get smacked around. Your father would like, if you misbehaved, you got smacked in the side of the head. You know what I mean? So it was always funny. Like, how'd you get the black eye? I I cut out of school and I was hanging out at the stores. My father wheeled up in the car, smacked me in the side of the head, threw me in the car, and took me back to school. You know what I mean? To us, it was like a joke. Like that kind of goonish behavior was just funny. Beat on the Brat's kind of born out of that. It's we like that part of our culture was funny. It was and it was something that everybody could relate to if you grew up in that type of environment. And not that I don't want me personally, I'm not saying that I grew up in an excessively violent household. My father did put his hands on me when I deserved it,
He
but
distributed discipline
yes, exactly. The beatings will continue
until morale improves. And
but it's
I think
but that
you can shed some light on this. Were they the first band to sing a song like this? Because Beach Boys were singing about teenage experiences and, going to the soda pop and falling in love at the dance. But they weren't singing about beating on brats with baseball bats. It seems like they were the first, like, New York-centric band to embrace juvenile humor and celebrate that culture. Like, I can't think of another that preceded them.
Yeah. No.
Certainly not that we're actually selling records.
Well, that's one of the things I think that made the Ramones as popular with younger people as it did, is they really were capturing all of youth culture, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about came from movies, right? A lot of the influences with lyrics and everything, including on this record, came from movies. So it was movies, cartoons, comic books, all the craziness of the time, the whole Charlie Manson thing and all the violent films and all of that stuff that was going on. The Ramones captured all of that, and it was something that teenage kids related to. Like I said before, I heard it right away, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is literally how I feel." They captured that intense energy that you feel when you're a kid, that teen angst thing. But they added in the humor and the all the youth culture and everything. To me, it really was genius. And I have to say, um, Tommy Ramone, really, of everybody in the band, Tommy Ramone was the one who recognized all of this and inspired Dee Dee and Joey to, inspire them to keep writing and pushing them to be more to go deeper into the characters that they were creating, really, Tommy came up with the look of the band, the leather jackets, the jeans, the sneakers, and T-shirts. He came up with the sound of the band. As I said before, he couldn't find a drummer to play the style he heard. Right? Tommy really created the entire image and and character of the Ramones. It was all Tommy. Dee Dee, Dee Dee and Joey's songwriting, absolutely huge and a major part. To me, Dee Dee Ramone is one of my favorite songwriters of all time, right? And this is not because I was in the Ramones, like as a fan. Um, but being able to take all of that imagery and the sound and the look and everything else, it was just instant success with young kids.
Yeah, and I think at this point and for the first few albums, they're all playing to their strengths. Dee
Yes.
Dee as the heart, Joey as the voice and the face, both of them as the genius songwriters. Johnny as the boss and the organizer and the motivator and the disciplinarian, perhaps when he needed to be,
Yep.
and Tommy as the captain
Yep.
and the visionary, and they're all playing to their equal strength. There's not a weak link amongst them, and they're just an absolute force to be reckoned with right out the gate. And it's so fully realized, and it's so conceptually just developed from the jump. It wasn't like they needed, like Blondie, right? First couple of Blondie albums are just sort of like test runs for Parallel Lines, and there's good songs on those first couple of albums. Same with Talking Heads. There's good songs on those first couple of albums, but they really take a few records to find their sound and find their look and their message. Ramones right out the gate is like, oh no, here we are, you've got everything as well. And we're going to keep going through the album now, and later on we'll talk about some of the films and the comic books specifically that influenced some of the songs on the first album. But track 3, another Joey tune, shortest song on the album, 1:30, and talking about lyrical minimalism. What I love about this tune, Judy is a Punk, is the second verse same as the first, and then they go third verse different from the first. Again, it's just so funny. And probably the first song ever to include the word punk in the title. Am I right?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. I think that is. Yeah. And this is uh in my top 3 Ramon songs. This is my favorite song on the record. Judy is a Punk. I I to me, Judy is a Punk really is the template that all punk rock was written on. Like literally. Like if you listen to the Dam, I always loved the Dam. The Damned are always my favorite band from the UK, punk band from the UK. Um, and I like them so much because they took the same track as the Ramones did, right? But Judy's a Punk is my favorite song to play live, and it's one of my favorite songs to listen to, and it's just great. Again, repeating chorus, repeating verses, played really fast. But the cool thing about Judy is a Punk is it just jumps right into it. There's no intro. There's no okay, run a measure of this. It's just right into it, and I as a when I was learning the songs for the first time, and I sat down and I was listening, figuring out the songs because I had never played in a cover band before. Um, I couldn't understand why they were playing it in the key that where on the neck they were playing it. I was like, why are they playing it there? Like it's like, it's not a D and it's not an E, so it's what, a D sharp or an E minor or something. And I was like, why would they play it there? And then later on I realized like so many of the songs followed the same progressions or the same patterns and stuff that they actually just tried to change where on the neck they were playing them a little bit different so everything wouldn't sound completely homogenized. um
God
but
bless them.
yeah but that is my favorite song on the record and one of my top 3 Ramon songs.
Amazing. Well, that's obviously going to be your pick for side A then, isn't it? I love
Absolutely.
it. And it's just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, in, out. And then
Yep.
next, you go from the shortest, fastest song on the album to the slowest. written by Tommy. I didn't realize this till reading up the track listing and who wrote what, because you'd hear this and just presume, well, this has got to be a Joey song. The way he sings it, the way he owns it. This, for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, seems to be the first indication that this guy is going to be an alternative heartthrob. He's going to be a crooner. He's going to be a heartthrob. He's going to be a pin-up for a whole generation that don't want to romanticize and fantasize about bands like the Bay City Rollers. They want something a bit more gritty and different. And it's just a beautiful love song that comes in after, you know, this real fast, just punk rock blueprint. They then totally switch gears and just say, hey, I want to be your boyfriend. And it's so convincing, and it's actually so sincere. You know, a lot of their songs, which are humorous, are playful and satirical. There's not an ounce of irony in this song. This is so from the heart, so blissful and beautiful. And I was just really nicely surprised to learn it was a Tommy composition.
And it totally makes sense too, because Tommy was a real student of all of the classic music, all the classic stuff from the 60s. You know, he really, and the 50s, he really loved all that stuff. And this song, on its face is representative of that. This I had tried to talk John into doing some of those types of songs live at later on, after I'd been in the band a while, and Joey was really struggling live. Joey got diagnosed with lymphoma in '94, and we retired in '96. So he went 2 years just really dragging himself through the set. And I had tried to talk Johnny into doing something like this live to give Joey an extra break. You know what I mean? Where we could slow it down, he could catch his breath, but Johnny was always like, no, nobody wants to hear that live, CJ. Everyone likes to listen to it on the record. They don't want to hear it live. So when I started touring on my own, when I got out on the road on my own, one of the first songs I added to the list, because of course, when I started touring as CJ Ramone, I tried to fill the set list with songs I didn't get to play with the Ramones that I had always wanted to play. But this was one of the first songs I added was "I Want to Be a Boyfriend," and because I always thought of all the Ramones ballady type songs, this one is probably my favorite. And there's other really great ones, absolutely, but this one, and especially for this record, this one was my favorite. And no surprise that Tommy wrote it.
I want to ask you, and we'll try and sort of keep it in this time period if we can, but while also addressing this idea, because I wasn't aware that they would rarely, if ever, play the slower stuff. You know, I know when you get to like the Alive record and it's all fast and you think, well, yeah, they're going to represent that. But was it really the case that from the start of their career, although they were always recording slow songs, they would very rarely, if ever, do any of those live? And if so, how did Joey feel about that? Because assumedly these songs were important to him and meant a lot to him. Was he like bummed out that he didn't get to sing them live, or was he like, no, I understand the brief, this is what we do live, like that's for the record, this is for live, separation of church and skate, as it were? Yeah. What's the deal with the fast and the slow push and pull?
I think early on, when they still believed that they were going to be like a teen beat, teen tiger pop band, they were more likely to play something like that live, but they would speed it up substantially. But back then they played everything a couple of beats per minute faster than the record speed, but they still played it at a tempo where Joey could sing all the lyrics, where he could actually fit all the lyrics in. But what they would do, so everything was a little bit faster, so the slow songs were a little bit faster, and the set didn't lose all that much momentum. But for the most part, they just wanted to play the most action-packed, lively, fast set, not give the kids a break, keep them dancing the whole time. And I think Joey understood that. uh and he never expressed to me like, oh, I wish we could do this in the set, or I wish we could do that in the set. He never said anything like that to me. But um I think uh I think towards the end there was room for it in the set. But by that point it was just, Johnny's thing was, the faster we play the set, the quicker we get off stage, the more money we make per hour. And like that's the way
Efficiency
Johnny thought.
first.
And but he, he was 100% right in that. He's like, the kids want it to hear it that fast. They love it. You know what I mean? It's he's like, it really, that's what fuels the pits that happen in front of the band. And that was, once they realized they weren't going to be a pop band, they turned towards the hardcore punk kids, uh, uh, the hardcore kids and the punk kids, and that's who they geared their records and their live shows towards.
Well, track number 5, Side A Ramones, the first horror movie tribute, obviously in 1974, one of, still to this day, the best horror films ever came out. Texas Chainsaw, Mexican, and this song's kind of all about that. Chainsaw, it has to be, right? Overtly inspired and informed by that amazing film.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, the writing about stuff from youth culture, including movies. And, for people at that point, like if you were into that type of thing, if you were into horror movies, and most kids were, back then, like, horror movies and sci-fi movies, that's left over from the 50s. The 50s is when all of that stuff kind of 50s, 60s is when all of that stuff makes it into youth culture, all the horror movies, sci-fi movies, and that carries over into the 70s. And the Ramones capitalize on it. They know it, it's like, so they basically insinuated themselves into youth culture by using stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, wait, you like horror movies? You like sci-fi movies? You ever hear about this band? They sing about it. You know what I mean? So it really is genius. And not that they invented it. They didn't invent it. I mean, the whole rock and roll, as it started out, was kind of based on the same thing, on what do we sing about to appeal to teenagers? Because as much as, we want to believe, like, guys like Elvis, were great songwriters and stuff. Elvis bought most of his songs. He didn't write most of them. Most of them were written by other people. And back then there were guys who sat around and they were songsmiths. They crafted these songs. They examined youth culture and what do we sing about to appeal to teenagers? Like, that became a very big market, and the Ramones were the continuation of that into the 70s, because mainstream music had pretty much abandoned that, or at least doing it in that style. But all of a sudden it was like singing about wizards and like all of this, like, high end stuff, that really moved far away from like youth culture and stuff. They started singing about all this other stuff, But
I do think, again, though, the Ramones were maybe, if not the first, they really had to be one of the first to do it in a sincere way. Because, when you think about those early rock and roll songs that were about horror films, stuff like, you have like The Martian Hop or The Purple People Eater. They were like novelty records. They were like wacky. Yes. They were one-off. They were these Ramones songs. Obviously, Chainsaw's kind of like sort of funny, especially with the intonation of the Mexican. But it's sincere again, and it's like, we love these movies. We're going to celebrate them. And when people think of this sort of hybrid subgenre term, horror punk, everybody goes to the Misfits first, and the Misfits are always, and rightly so, celebrated as being the inventors, maybe the perfecters of horror punk. But actually, the Ramones were kind of there a few years earlier doing it with songs like Chainsaw.
Yeah. Well, and but this is how things happen, right? So the Ramones come out, they mix all this really great stuff, right? And and then what happens is people took certain aspects of their music that they identified with and they create a different genre. It's a splintering thing, you know what I mean? Like everything splinters, everything does. All the bands that started huge movements, the movements that followed generally were a splinter movement from the movement that they started. So not only did the Ramones influence, horror punk, but a lot of the heavy metal dudes really loved the quick, fast downstroking. You know what I mean? And that became something else. You know what I mean? And then the people that liked kind of the punky pop feel became bands like Green Day and stuff like that, where they just took the pop aspect of what the Ramones did with a little bit of snarl to it, and you know what I mean. So uh, uh, the Ramones live on not just within their own fans and their own scene, but also through these other splinter groups that were influenced by them that created whole other genres.
You make an amazing point there, and I think that's really important to highlight, is that their influence really made waves, not just in punk, but as you say, in grunge and in horror punk, thrash metal, hardcore, all these movements that came in the 80s. A lot of these, bands would have been kids discovering the Ramones, hearing those first few records, and as you say, singling in and honing in on specific, because there was so much to absorb and enjoy with the Ramones. We'll go to the next song on the album. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, and it's like, again, you can't imagine anyone else other than Dee Dee writing this song. This has to be a Dee Dee Ramone song. And it's just, again, the lyric, just like, now I want to sniff some glue. Now I want to have something to do. All the kids want to sniff some glue. All the kids want something to do. And even inspired the British punk fanzine, Sniffing Glue. Like, the influence was spiraling out, not just in American culture, but across the pond in England as well. It was like right out of the gate from that first album, their influence was international. Even if they weren't getting played on the radio loads and they weren't selling thousands and millions of copies, they were influencing anyone that was paying attention, right, from the underground art scenes.
Yeah. And when Dee Dee wrote those lyrics, he was writing them from, it was very much, tongue in cheek, but Dee Dee sniffed glue. You know what I mean? Like he was real. He would do that. It's it's funny because when I was a kid, right? So when I was a kid, like I grew up building models, right? If you were, if you grew up in my time period, building models was still a thing. You know what I mean? I liked generally I liked warplanes, but I also would do like, Frankenstein and some horror movie things too. I loved it. But I used to love the smell of the glue. You know what I mean? And like literally, like that became a thing. You know what I mean? Like we all did when we were kids, just to see what it was like. Um, funny story, kind of related, but uh, I was when I was a kid, me and a friend of mine were huffing gas in his garage, like just breathing in gas fumes because I always loved the smell of gas. My dad worked at gas stations when I was a kid, so I was around gas stations a lot. I used to love the smells, like the gasoline and the oil and like, the just old gasolines. I mean, old gas stations really have. So me and this kid would huff and glue, and we both passed out. And I came to the sound of his father slapping him in the face, trying to wake him up. I got up and ran out of the garage. But that
That's
was
now
a
I
thing.
want to sniff some glue and beat on the brat.
But back then, that was a thing, like huffing glue or huffing gas, or I mean, then it went to like that weird thing with spray paint and all that, which that's really out there. But yeah, like right out of youth culture. Dee Dee writes that song, and every kid who grew up building models, it's like I know I know that smell, you know. But great song, just a great song. And again, with the humor and the tempos and everything, it's like each line is funnier than the last, you know.
It really is. I think as well, punk obviously from the very beginning was the music that parents hated. It's like, oh, little Johnny's gonna put a safety pin through his nose and he's not going to be able to get a job, and it was a genuine concern. But I feel like the appreciation of all the punk bands was because they really did, as you've mentioned a couple of times, they spoke to the youth. They spoke to young kids in a way that was real, in a way that bands like Genesis and Yes, and Robertson, Lake and Palmer, all these, but they just weren't doing. They'd lost touch with the younger kids because by this point they're middle-aged men, and that's fine. So their subjects and their matters of interest have evolved, but there's a whole new generation of kids that want the truth. They want something they can connect to and believe in and understand and be entertained by. And the Ramones truly, like, they actively seized that gap in the market, didn't they? And they drove their flag in the sand and staked their claim to youth culture in a really overt and awesome way.
Yeah, it was the first decade where the young people, the youth were not being addressed, by by major record labels, right? The 60s were so influential, and the bands from the 60s were just so amazing. Like, it was really a renaissance of playing music, right? Even, I think the average player back then was just way better than the average player even now, because it was like total freedom. You know what I mean? Everything wasn't so genre based. Like, the 60s just opened everything up and people really got into playing. So when the 70s come around, everyone is still like, the 70s, especially the early 70s, is like the hangover from the 60s, where, it's like rock and roll, so many of the big pop stars have died. Drugs and alcohol have like run rampant throughout the business. Like, everything's about cocaine and heroin and alcohol and I think, or hallucinogenics. And I think like all of that like made this whole weird time period music where like you either had like singer songwriter or like super like just like super really well written, well performed pop music, and then like all the stuff that you're talking about, all the real progressive stuff. And I got to say, I was a huge fan of a lot of the progressive bands. Huge fan. Yes, for one, I saw them multiple times in concert. Still to this day, Chris Squire's like, to me, one of the best bass players that ever played in rock and roll. Chris Squire. Absolutely. John Entwistle will be another one. But I loved all of that stuff. But the record industry ignored like young people at that point. They just kind of were like ignoring this new group of kids in that mid to late 70s time period, and the Ramones just kind of slid right in there and gave the kids what they wanted. They wanted something exciting and fun, and they could laugh at it, not, feel emotionally connected to it, or, like, oh, that song takes me to a new level. They didn't want that. You know what I mean? They wanted like, give me danger. You know what I mean? Like, give me something to have fun with, and the Ramones just kind of slid right in there.
Well, let's close side A out with the final track. Another kind of horror and comic, I guess you'd say. It's playing on the teenage kind of nightmare of what dwells down below. I don't want to go down to the basement. What's interesting for me about this song is it's a co-write. It's Dee Dee and Johnny. This is the first time on this record so far that Johnny's had a hand in any of the songwriting, and super interesting because really early on, Dee Dee and Joey seem to be the kind of geniuses in terms of songwriting. Tommy as well. Johnny, and a lot of people think he's the guy, he doesn't get a song credit until the last song on side A, which I just thought was really interesting. And a lot of the songs on the first few albums are always co-writes with Dee Dee and Johnny, never Johnny on his own. So did he write with Dee Dee generally? That was how he liked to create when he did.
Yeah. Johnny and Dee Dee were the partners in the band, and before the band ever started, Johnny and Dee Dee were like the two street kids that would, like, you know, they were ruffians, you know, they were like, there's so many songs on other records where I can point stuff out when we get to those records. Some of the experiences that were written into songs that they had shared together when they were kids, but they were, you know, they were wild men, you know, but they always worked together. And and I'm sure probably, for the most part, Johnny would get an idea for a part and say to Dee Dee, hey, I like this part. And Dee Dee would be like, okay, do that. And then we'll do this. And I'll lay down the lyrics. And I'm sure that's how it went. I'm positive. Johnny never, I don't think he ever really, well, he did a couple of times. He did mention, you know, about him and Dee Dee writing together, but he told me that you know, they had decided, I think it was right after this one, they had decided just to credit the band for everything from there on out.
Yeah, but, I've been reading some of the first few records, and there's definitely there's a mix, a really interesting mix, where some songs is credited as all the band, others it's Dee Dee and Johnny, others it's just Dee Dee, others it's just Joey, and trying to guess, you know, knowing okay, he wrote it. Sometimes you would really like some of, and again we'll get to these in later records, but some of the romantic songs that you think would just be so obviously Joey, often's Dee Dee, and you're like, man, this guy, you know, he could do the sort of street drug influence, prostitution, dark underbelly of urban squalor. He could tap into that, but then he could write this beautiful, sad or bittersweet love song, and the guy was just a poet, a genius, and an unsung hero, I think, in the songwriting, you know, lineup of that band.
Really looking forward to those discussions too, because there's so many songs where, like I said before, Dee Dee is one of my favorite songwriters of all time, and there's so many songs where, you know, he really just shines in a way that you know, is you would think was out of character for him. But you know, that's why when the Ramones got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Dee Dee's speech was, I want to pat myself on the back, you know what I mean, and good job, Dee Dee. You know, he was like that because he recognized his talent. Dee Dee knew he was a talented songwriter, and he always felt like his craziness outshined his songwriting. And what he knew was really good songwriting and genius, a lot of people would just overlook and be like, oh, that's just crazy Dee Dee. You know what I mean? He got overlooked a lot for, you know, for his talents and his songwriting, but his behavior was was quite
distracting.
Yeah.
Well, this is, you know, part of the mission of this podcast is to shine a light on, sure, we can talk about the fun anecdotes that highlight some of his eccentricities, and they'll be entertaining for people, but really we're here to celebrate the craft and the skill and the talent of these guys as songwriters, as players, as performers, as artists. And you know, I think already we've given hopefully a nice overview of side A of record one. We're going to jump over to Patreon for the side B. So if you want to come and hang out and listen to the next 7 songs be discussed in detail, we've obviously got the album artwork to still talk about. We'll talk about how the band members viewed these records later down the line in hindsight, years later. We're going to be going through each album one by one chronologically. We'll put out side A every week on the public podcast platforms for everybody to enjoy for free. And if you want to come and support the show on Patreon and dig a little deeper, then patreon.com/CJ Says is the place to go. We've already also put up the bonus interview of our chat with Duff McKagan as well. He was such a chatty guy. We spoke to him for an hour and 45 minutes. So we put out an hour as a podcast, and we've got another whole 40-minute section on Patreon. So you can go over there and dig into that as well. All the full video episodes will be up there as well. Dude, Duff, what a gent.
I just gotta say, the with the Duff McKagan interview, I was starstruck.
He's a legend, though, isn't he? He's a legend.
Oh my God, what a life! And it was really cool to hear all those stories. But I got to apologize. I didn't quite interact as often as I should have. But man, it was great to hear his stories.
Well, he was a talker. And it was also, for the benefit of, giving everybody the full kind of transparent truth. It was the very first interview we recorded as well, and everybody has to start somewhere, CJ. And it was a great first episode. And what I adore about that man is that he's such a icon and a star, but just such a down to earth dude who's still so connected to punk rock.
That's the key. He came up from the punk rock community. He didn't come up from the, the glam rock community or anything like that. Long before he was part of that, he was part of the punk rock community, and that's where he gets his street attitude from. It was just really easy to talk to. But the thing I liked about him the most, he's a really smart guy.
Yeah,
he's a really smart guy. He was, talked about all the trappings of the music industry and everything, but he's smart and he came out on top, and that's why I give him a lot of love and respect.
Yeah, not many people from his past and the scenes that he was in, both in Seattle and in LA, not many of them made it out, did they? Let alone, continue to tour stadiums around the world. So he's really unique in that respect. And I think you have to be smart to survive in this industry, right? At a certain point.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, dude, what a pleasure. What a joy. I'll see you over on Patreon very soon for Side B. Before we go, let's pick a song each, our mutual individual favorites from Side A of Ramones. And what I think we should do as we go through the whole discography, we'll build your playlist and my playlist, and everybody listening, join us in that journey, and let's all make our own ultimate Ramones playlist, starting at the start. We'll go all the way to the end, and then you can finish that playlist as we've gone through the whole catalog and share it with your friends, and you can introduce everybody to the ultimate Ramones songs in order so you can take them on that sonic journey. CJ, you're the boss. I'll let you go first. Side A, one song. What's it going to be?
Judy is a Punk.
It was never in doubt, was it, as soon as you said?
Nope.
Well, listen, I was going to go with one or two, and Blitzkrieg Pop, I think everybody knows. So we're going to leave that out. I'm going to choose Beat on the Brat for mine. So Judy is a Punk for CJ, Beat on the Brat for me. Make a note of your favorite song, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Ramones, Side A, one track. See you over on Patreon for Side B, and join us every week as we go through the whole catalog. And we'll build this world-conquering Ramones playlist together. And I'm just genuinely, truly mean this, so excited to go on this journey with you, and so thankful for this opportunity and this experience. And I know we're still really early on in the whole adventure, but already it's given me so much joy, and I just wanted to say thank you, brother, from the heart.
I could not do it without you, Matt. There's no way. There's no way I could do it without you. You're one of the few people I could sit down and talk like this with, and you know how I am. I'm not always the most gifted orator, but it's just really nice to sit down across from you and get this little bit of history done.
Well, I would disagree that you're not the best orator as well, because the whole reason I wanted to team up with you is I actually thought you were very skilled in that department. So don't be too hard on yourself. And see you next time. Thank you, and thank you so much to everybody listening. CJ, over to you to close it out, my friend.
Ramones forever.
Sound checks at 5:02. Record stores and interviews. Oh, but I can't wait to be with you tomorrow.
All right, guys, that was side A of our deep dive series. If you're interested in hearing Matt and I's review on side B, head over to patreon.com/CJ Says. We hope to see you guys on the next one.